Next, the political battle over the detainees still being held at the U.S. detention center in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Attorney General Eric Holder sparred with Republicans in Congress today over the future of the inmates being held at Guantanamo, as special correspondent Simon Marks reports.
The Attorney General was on Capitol Hill this morning testifying at a U.S. Senate hearing on the Justice Department's budget. But the talk soon turned to the President's executive order signed 2 days after his inauguration that mandates the closure of the detention center in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Last week in Europe, the Attorney General announced that 30 of the 241 remaining Guantanamo inmates have now been approved for release, 7 years after the detention center opened. At its height, it housed more than 625 prisoners. Today, as the U.S. presses European nations to accept some of the detainees awaiting freedom, Washington is coming under pressure to do the same.
The paramount consideration that we will have is the safety of the American people.
In a contentious exchange with Republican Senator Richard Shelby of Alabama, the Attorney General said the Obama administration has no plans to allow terrorists to walk the streets of the USA.
Transfer or release of these detainees will only happen in those instances where we are convinced that that can be done in a way that the communities that receive them overseas with our allies will not have any impact on the safety of the place that is receiving them.
Excuse me a minute. Excuse me. Are you saying that, one, you believe you have the legal authority to bring terrorists into this country and disperse them around the country and the communities?
What I'm saying is that with regard to those who you would describe as terrorists, we would not bring them into this country and release them. Anybody who we consider to be a terrorist.
That pledge failed to dissuade the Republicans from launching a bill, the Keep Terrorists Out of America Act, that would block the transfer to the U.S. of any Guantanamo inmates, those cleared for freedom and those who may eventually go on trial.
A number of these detainees could be brought to the Southern District of New York to stand trial, which is literally within walking distance of Ground Zero. It's within walking distance of City Hall, within walking distance of the Brooklyn Bridge, police headquarters, and the thought of having any number of these detainees in Guantanamo, the security provisions that require, the risk it would create, and again, being literally in the shadow of Ground Zero, I find not just offensive, but also extremely dangerous.
Caught in the middle of the increasingly intense political battle over Guantanamo's future are 17 detainees who were cleared for release more than 4 years ago. Muslims from China's Uyghur community, they claim they could be tortured by Chinese authorities if they're returned to their native Xinjiang province in the north of the country. Instead, a U.S. district court last year ordered the Uyghurs to be resettled here, in Fairfax County in northern Virginia. There's a vibrant Uyghur community here, the largest in the country, and 17 local families have offered to take the 17 Guantanamo detainees into their homes. Uyghurs first came here, near Washington, D.C., as students back in the 1980s. Their numbers started to swell amid allegations of Chinese repression during the mid-90s. Alim Saitov of the Uyghur American Association says the detainees pose no threat to the peace and tranquility of Northern Virginia.
We do have families here who are ready to help them, take them into their houses. They do have separate bedrooms, I understand, to house them, to provide them food, and to provide them a feeling of they belong to this community. Also, everything needed in the house, like daily articles, they need things like that. And also provide them any kind of support they need in terms of locating a job and if they need any kind of other assistance.
The Chinese government wants the Uyghur detainees sent home, but both the Bush and Obama administrations have been fearful of the fate that may await the 17 detainees in Xinjiang province, where human rights organizations have claimed the Uyghurs' Muslim faith is under wholesale assault by the state. But Republicans continue to raise concerns about freeing the Uyghurs from Guantanamo more than 4 years after their classification as enemy combatants was officially dropped by the government. In a commentary published earlier this week on the conservative website Human Events, the Virginia Congressman Frank Wolf wrote, "Information I have received indicates that the 17 Uyghurs being held at Guantanamo may be more dangerous than the public has been led to believe." That's an allegation an attorney representing 6 of the Uyghur detainees vigorously denies.
The perception that these men are somehow terrorists is just flat wrong. They were cleared by the military in 2003. They have been exonerated by the courts, and the Bush administration has conceded that they are not enemy combatants. These men are not, and they never were terrorists. So any sort of fear that people might have is just based on a misperception, and we hope to correct that perception.
Supporters of the Uyghurs today filed a brief with the Supreme Court urging it to order their release. The Justice Department's budget request includes funding for a proposed task force to consider what to do with each of the 241 inmates tonight spending another evening in Guantanamo Bay.